Good evening, everyone. Yat as ine shik eto shidine. Ya at shaya Tatiana Benali and Ishke Toto Nashan and this Ejitachi Nishlin Shashidine Bashichin. Hello, my name is Tatiana Benali. I am from Shiprock on the Navajo Nation. I am the Zuni clan of Tachitni and born for the Tiwa Bear clan. I currently reside here in Lenape-Hoking and here with the American Indian Community House. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our 5th installment of this series, so thank you to everyone who has shown up to multiple series of this event, or if this is your first time joining us, welcome. This series is hosted by the American Indian Community House to provide an intentional online space to collectively explore and discuss resources and information regarding Indigenous issues and conflicts that directly affect us today. Through shared concern and efforts, we will discuss actions, solutions, and the many different ways we can contribute towards the movement and change making. Online in solidarity, led by and for Indigenous folks, we will focus on providing a space that is accessible, respectful, and in unity. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. I just wanted to remind everyone that this is one event of many that the Community House hosts. We are obviously in a time of social distancing, quarantining, and it can be hard to find those native spaces virtually. But the Community House is doing a great job of providing that online native presence for us all. So I would recommend checking out the Instagram, Facebook, or sign up with the newsletter from the H website to keep up to date on upcoming events. There is programming on Wellbriety supports, elder storytelling, makers labs, at-home fitness classes, census events, as well as this series. There are also special events to look forward to. Last week, H had a Zoom performance of the Rabbit Play by Ryan Pierce. There is a lot going on, so you can always keep to date on our social media to see what events you want to attend. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Novo, New York City Census, New York Women's Foundation, for continuing to help us provide the resources for our community and continue to do the work we do. Again, I'm so happy to have you all here. Our past social justice series focused on movements happening in Mashpee, Shinnecock, Wet'suwet'en, and Southwestern tribal territories. Throughout these installments, we are continuously working on our collective understanding of how to garner intertribal solidarity, flesh out our definitions of self-determination, settler colonialism, and this one will be no different. This event will be gathering to honor the relatives that have gone missing and murdered. Indigenous women, trans, two-spirit, gender non-conforming relatives experience some of the highest rates of violence and murder in Turtle Island. We'll be holding a community roundtable to discuss different aspects that contribute to MMIW. We will hold space, share resources, and discuss what we can do to be good relatives in this time. I'd also like to go over the agenda for the evening so we can see what we have ahead of us tonight. And I posted that in the Zoom chat, but I'll do that one more time. So yeah, 6 to 6:15, that's pretty much where we're at. Introductions, brief overview. We'll be watching a video and going over some of the resources. And at 6:35, we will be having our kind of community roundtable where we'll go more in depth in discussion of MMIWG2S. And we'll be participating in some actions. 7:30 to 7:45, we'll be having a candlelight vigil. And then 7:45 to 8, we'll be having our closing remarks. We will be having some announcements from some relatives here on the call, and we'll be talking about our next series, which will be hopefully surrounding events happening on Mashpee territory. With that said, if you want to take some time during this time that we're watching like the film to go grab a paper and a marker, your phone, have your phone on hand, make sure it's charged, and have a candle and a lighter or some form of that. Yeah, okay. So I am going to go ahead and switch to the video now. The movie is titled The Search, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. It was made by Al Jazeera for Fault Lines. And we will also post a link in the chat if you would like to view it on your own accord or for reference later. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up.
Yeah, she's an amazing kid. She was just always trying to help others. And I don't think I taught her to take care of herself.
So it's 10 years on and you're still searching. You're still searching these streets.
Yep. Still looking.
Across the United States, Indigenous families are searching for their loved ones, for closure.
We would tell each other, what do you think she said? And what was her last words, you know? Did she cry for help, or did she pray? You know, did she shout, you know, I love you, to anybody?
And searching for answers, why their family members were taken from them. Fault Lines traveled across the U.S. to look at what's behind the crisis of Indigenous women going missing and ask what more can be done to stop it.
Henny was a good person. She didn't deserve what happened to her. And I want justice for Henny.
We've come to Kent, Washington, just south of Seattle. Tina Russell is showing us some of the places where she's gone to search for her niece, Alyssa.
See, we had search parties through all this area over here, all these woods, because I actually had a dream I found her body back there.
Why do you keep the flyers in the car?
I never know when I need to make copies. I'll meet somebody and talk to them about Alyssa and hand them a flyer. Sometimes it's just the beach in the park. Me and my cousins will go to the beach and just walk along the beach handing out flyers.
Grab that real quick. It's been just over 10 years since Alyssa's family saw or heard from her. She was 21.
And so you have the red dress.
Yes, so I made this red dress. I'm eventually going to put a charm on it and put it on a skirt that I'm making for myself right now. No teeth. That is the cutest picture ever, and she did not like this picture. She did not appreciate that picture because of her teeth.
It was a chaotic time for the family back then. Alyssa's mother was dying.
Alyssa's mom is right here, and this is Alyssa's brother, Corey. He lives in Arizona.
We knew she wasn't going to be there much longer. And I told Alyssa, I talked to her on the phone. She's like, okay, Grandma, I'm on my way. And she, in all the years her mom was sick, she was always there. She wouldn't just go somewhere and not show up. She might be late, but she'd be there.
That was the last time Barbara or anyone from the family spoke to her. A few days later, Alyssa's mother died, and there was still no word from Alyssa.
Everything happened so fast with my sister being sick and Alyssa. It's like there were so many blurs.
We were just thrown into a turmoil.
Did any witnesses come forward?
There was a witness that said that they saw Alyssa talking to somebody in a green truck with out-of-state plates.
That was one of the only leads that turned up after Alyssa was last heard from. A witness said they saw her talking to a man in a green truck at this intersection. Another important development in the case was that the Kent police received a 911 call from Melissa's cell phone.
The 911 is pretty haunting, actually.
Sergeant Tim Ford was one of the original detectives on Alyssa's case and heard the 911 call.
It almost sounded like she was saying, "Help me."
But the call cut, and police were unable to pinpoint a location.
It just really bothers me, especially with that 911 call. When you listen to it, and you can hear her voice, and you know that that's maybe the last time she was ever spoken. And so it bothers me that we were just never able to get any credible evidence pointing to anybody.
With no answers from authorities, the family, including Alyssa's little brother Jamar, are left wondering what happened.
That's pretty. Whose dog is that?
Mine.
Oh.
You didn't even see the little ankle biter.
If she's still alive or gone.
Every time they find a body, every single time there's a body found on the news, there's a pause. It's literally like you're dead for a moment because you have to wonder, is it Alyssa? I think I've called the coroner more than anybody should in a lifetime.
The family can only search, wait, and hope, including Alyssa's daughter, who was only 3 years old when she went missing.
She had this big string of beads and she would hang it on the door so in case her mom came home, she could hear the beads rattling.
We don't know what happened, so we can't heal.
For relatives of people who go missing, finding closure is often impossible. And stories like Alyssa's are all too common in the United States, where Native Americans go missing at a disproportionately high rate. 2 hours away from where Alyssa was last seen is the Yakima Nation.
We have a very horrible thing that has come to our reservation. A lot of pain and hurt has been done with our people. And our hope and our prayer is that the word is reaching those that need to put the necessary things in place to help those of you that are still looking down the road, looking for your loved ones.
My name is Roxanne White, and I'm from here, and I am Yakima, and I'm Nez First, and I'm what you call the main organizer of this event, but I'm more than an organizer. I'm a survivor, I'm a family member. Today, this is about our community, our families, our loved ones.
People are meeting here to raise money for the search efforts of Rosinda Strong, a 31-year-old mother of 4 who went missing in October.
She's been missing since then. She'd never leave home without telling us. But I'm gonna be her voice until I find her.
Across the country, Indigenous communities have been trying to draw attention to cases like Rosinda's.
We do find I'm not gonna give up on anybody else either that's here on Yakima Reservation that's still missing somebody.
But advocates and family members have started to raise awareness about the high rates of violence that disproportionately impact Indigenous communities. Part of the problem is that government agencies don't have comprehensive data on how many people in the U.S. are missing.
We can't solve problems we don't track. We can't prevent violence that we don't bother to pay attention to.
Anita Lucchese is a doctoral student who has built a database to keep track of how many Indigenous women in the U.S. and Canada are missing and have been murdered.
Whatever information we get is just kind of handed to us with no context or explanation. And there's never any opportunity to include us in that data collection or analysis process. So really what we're trying to do is find and gather as much information as possible to support tribes and Native communities in making, effective data-driven decisions on how to protect our women and girls.
Anita has documented over 1,800 cases in the U.S. dating back to 1900. But 75% of the cases are just from the past 2 decades.
People ask me a lot, why are Native women going missing or being murdered? What's the reason? And the reality is, unfortunately, there is no one reason. I think the one unifying factor would be colonialism and ongoing colonial occupation. It teaches people, whether native or non-native, it teaches folks to undervalue Native women, to see us as less than human, to see us as exotic and sexy and easy to use and abuse.
When you talk to families, are there any commonalities in their experiences with law enforcement?
I think, one general commonality that most families experience is that law enforcement are not helpful, especially in the beginning hours when it matters most. So whether someone has gone missing or has been killed, usually there's very little communication with families. Families are often not made to feel as if they're being heard.
And I know that these banners are medicine. This making Lucinda visible and making people see her. And this is why we do what we do. Because we want all the families to know that they're not alone.
Every family who has somebody who's missing or who has experienced that at one point or another, they know the scale and the magnitude of that grief and confusion and frustration that comes with the process of trying to search and advocate for a missing loved one. Imagine that tenfold, 50-fold, a million, we don't know. The ripple effect is so much bigger than any of us are even able to measure.
In the backyard, I look up there and think of her, because she always used to be up there. No matter what time of day it was, night, she'd be up there, right there. The biggest one between those two. We'd always lose her in the backyard, but that's where we would find her. And we wouldn't hear her, but we'd hear her laugh.
One of the most important things law enforcement can do when someone goes missing is to act quickly. That didn't happen in the case of 14-year-old Henny Scott on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana.
She was just like this ball of light that was just bing, 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 bing. Yeah.
The last time her mother Paula spoke to her, it was a Friday evening last December. Henny called to ask if she could go to a basketball tournament.
And I told her, no, Henny, you can't, you're grounded. And she said, okay, I'll be home in a bit. And that's the last I heard from her.
When Henny didn't come home, Paula first took to social media to ask if anyone had seen her. 5 days later, she and her husband Nathan went to their local law enforcement, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, a federal agency.
The reason why I was down there is reaching out to them is because I needed help to look elsewhere. And when they told me, did you check her friend's house? Or maybe she's got a new boyfriend, did you check there? Yeah, I checked there. That's why I'm here, because I need more help looking elsewhere.
It's not clear where or even if the police searched for Henny, but what Paula and Nathan do know is that an alert wasn't issued for her until 2 weeks after they reported her missing. By that point, the family had organized a volunteer search party to look for her.
I seen some birds going up and down like that. And what's a search party searched on one side and another search party searched on one side. We walked down there and, I could smell it, man. I could smell the death, man. And that's when I got the feeling of, I need to find her, I need to find her. She's someplace around here.
When it got dark, they called off the search for the night with plans to resume in the morning.
So that's when they found her. They found her, where I went down the ravine. They found her up towards the house, maybe about 50 yards from where I was at. And it just felt like I should have went that way, you know. But I know God, you know, He probably didn't want me to see her like that.
And then they brought her down to that tin building where we were at. They just like opened the back of that Suburban. She was already in a body bag, and they just like let us stand beside there and have a moment with her.
Paula and Nathan told us there have been few answers from authorities since Henny was found.
I believe I wasn't taken seriously. That if I had been, that she would be here.
Hi.
It's the kids, the little ones that it hurts the most. Like just like last night, our baby girl was just crying, you know, and she said, "Dad, man," you know. I said, "What's wrong, baby?" "My heart hurts, man. You know, I know my heart is breaking, Dad, because Henny's gone, Dad."
The Bureau of Indian Affairs declined our request for an interview, citing the open investigation, which is being conducted by the FBI.
But we get through it. We get through it a lot, because
it's hard, though.
Yeah, it is hard, but you know, we want justice to be served. We want the process to work for us.
But getting justice for Henny might not be easy. Fighting violent crime and achieving justice on reservations is complicated due to a collision of different factors. One is that most tribal police departments are understaffed and under-resourced.
Navajo Reservation, so it goes north of Flagstaff. Grand Canyon this is the Grand Canyon.
We've come to the Navajo Nation, the largest Native nation in the United States.
You said there's about 40,000 people that live
in this area, yeah,
that you cover.
Yeah, and that's based on the last census from 2010. I'm sure there's more now, and that's where, you know, if I get a call, not easy, you know, that's a good hour and a half drive for me to get there.
The Navajo Nation stretches across 3 states, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. And its police force is spread thin.
We do investigations. We try to get as much done right then and there, but sometimes we do need to go back and do follow-ups and try to go back and visit people, find people, but then we're still doing our regular patrol duties. On a given night like this, we're just gonna go from call to call to call.
Another factor is that tribes don't have jurisdiction over non-Native Americans for all crimes, aside from domestic violence, a recent change. But beyond that, they also have limited sentencing power, even over members of their own nation for major crimes, including homicide, assault, and kidnapping. What this means is that addressing violent crime is primarily in the hands of the federal government.
In the late 19th century, the federal government imposed itself on tribal nations and said, basically, we don't trust you to police yourselves, and passed laws that allowed them to come into Indian country and do crime control. It was imposed. It wasn't a request of the tribal nations. And yet that's still the law today that governs when a family is going through a crisis.
And I think the way the system is set up is if federal doesn't take it for whatever reasons, then we still can prosecute in tribal court for it. But the maximum they could be given is a year in prison and up to $5,000 fine.
For what? A year in prison and a $5,000 fine for what?
That's the maximum we could do for any of our, like for the homicide charge on the tribal level, that's the maximum right there. You would rather go with the federal level with the FBI and CI.
The problem with the federal authority is that there have been a lot of concerns that the federal agencies don't respond, that they don't take these crimes seriously typically federal officials or federal criminal authority is interested in, white collar crime and terrorism and immigration and major drug trafficking rings. So when they hear, oh, you need to go investigate a domestic violence offense, there's a sense culturally in the department that that's not my job. I have more important things to do than worry about what's happened to one Indian woman 4.5-hour drive away.
The wait for justice is something Valia knows too well. Her older sister Ariel went missing in the summer of 2017. She was 26. Just a few months later, her remains were found in the canyon below this bridge in Arizona.
This is where my sister was found in October. My mom was the one that just started putting flowers here to remember her and just to get a piece of where she was last found, where she last took her breath, I guess. It's difficult to know that this is known as the bridge to my family. Someone that we used to call our sister, was known as just the bridge.
Even though it's been a year and a half since Ariel was found, Valia told us they only know what they hear from whispers in the community.
Rumors are that she was thrown off and that the people responsible went back down there and cut her in half. And they burned her lower part of the body and they left the upper torso.
Did you find that out from the FBI, or did somebody else tell you that?
Somebody else. It's just rumors. It's just rumors. We don't hear stuff directly from the FBI or the CIA.
It was nearly a year before Ariel's remains were returned to Valia and the family. By that time, their mother, Jacqueline, had passed away.
It impacted her the worst. She was depressed. She would call me and she'd be like, "Hi, sweetie, what are you doing?" "Nothing, Mom." "What are you doing?" And she, "Oh, I'm over here at the bridge. I'm spending time with your sister."
At one point, Valia says investigators suggested Ariel had taken her own life.
I said, "What, do you know what happened? Have you guys found the people that did it to her?" And then they were like, "Oh, we think it's suicide." And I'm like, "Suicide?" It's like, that's not impossible. So my sister had no reason to kill herself. She was excited for my pregnancy and to meet the baby. So I told her, nope. She had a lot of stuff to live for. And she loved taking selfies with my grandpa. She's the only one that can get him to take a selfie.
Who's this?
That's my son.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she and him shared a close relationship,
Since that initial meeting with authorities, there's been no answers, only questions as to what really happened to Ariel.
The FBI victim advocate, she just tells me that there isn't much evidence to go to her case.
I'm sorry, which one?
Oh, this one is her, my mom, and me.
A lack of evidence is the main reason federal officials give for declining to prosecute crimes on reservations.
That shouldn't be the end of the discussion. There should be then okay, let's see what went wrong in this case, why there's no evidence or why the evidence isn't good enough, and make sure that doesn't happen again, rather than just repeating the cycle over and over and over.
The FBI declined to speak with us about Ariel's case, citing the open investigation.
Justice at this point just seems really far. I want justice for my sister, but it just seems like the person out there is still out there, around other daughters, sisters, aunts, grandmas. He could do it again. Like, he thinks that no one can convict him of the crime that he did. But I just want to see him off the streets. I don't know who he is, but that's all I want.
One thing that's helped Valia and other families we spoke with is to talk about their loved ones, so people know who they were and what happened to them.
She was a beautiful person, and she cared and loved everyone. And she wanted the best for everybody.
Some states and federal officials have started to take action. New legislation is being proposed with the goal of tracking, how many Indigenous men and women have gone missing, and to find solutions. It's a small step, but it's one that families hope can prevent others from experiencing the loss they have.
For her to be that young, it's just heartbreaking. I don't know if I could ever recover from this.
You have to be her voice, huh? Because like she said, she was silent out there, but she's gone. She's louder than that now. Because it brought up a movement, man, that needs to be addressed. Not only in this state, but everywhere else in the country.
I'm one of the fortunate ones that got to find my girl and bring her home. There's some ladies out there that have never found their daughters or sons and never got to bring them home.
People don't know what you're going through on the inside, but there's so many expectations of you like to just move on with life, and you can't. Nobody has sewn the wound closed. The wound isn't closed, so it's getting an infection, and that's what it's doing. It inside of our hearts, it's infected. It's poisoning our spirits. It's causing us so much trauma. We have to keep searching for her. We can't let anything stop us, because if we don't look, who's going to look? I love that smile. Oh my gosh. Oh, I wish I could see it.
So that was a pretty heavy film, but I think it touched on a lot of like important aspects of, missing and murdered Indigenous relatives that we have to be like aware of. You know, colonialism, imperialism, capitalism are very violent to Indigenous communities. And yeah, I guess I wanted to leave some room for people to chime in as well and kind of touch upon what we just saw, and also just like have some space, for like these relatives that have gone missing and murdered, and maybe just like keep them in your thoughts and in your hearts like today, and continue to like work towards like dismantling these violent like systems that are present in our everyday life. Yeah, but this video does a good job of documenting part of what makes up missing, murdered Indigenous woman, trans, two-spirit. We see that infrastructure, systematic racism, and Indigenous erasure, which are all a part of settler colonialism and imperialism, are tallied into this. I would also like to add that capitalism also plays a big role in missing, murdered Indigenous women, trans, and two-spirit, this crisis, by continuing to use land for extractive economies such as oil, coal, water, land, and other natural resources. We can see this happen all over Turtle Island, as our land has been occupied since 1492. This brings me to a pretty well-known quote by LaDonna Bravebull Allard, which reads, "The abuse of women is well known in history and tells you a lot about what is happening to our earth." And LaDonna Bravebull is from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. This quote like stuck out to me as I think of like my experience growing up on the Navajo Nation and the extractive economies that were a part of, our everyday life: coal mining, uranium mining, fracking, They all have this like violent presence in our community, not only, you know, by like poisoning like the land, but also bringing that violence like in proximity to our community. We have like these, with extractive economies, we also have like man camps that emerge. And man camps are temporary housing facilities for up to thousands of mostly non-Indigenous male workers brought into different Indigenous communities for industrial work. They create social conditions for an increase of violence against Indigenous women and relatives. The culture of work conditions of man camps exacerbate isolation, drug and alcohol abuse, violence, misogyny, hypermasculinity, and racism among the men living there. And with that proximity, we find, you know, a rise in like the missing and murdered cases. But obviously that's like not like the only thing. There are also a lot of ongoing struggles that our tribes are experiencing when we're trying to look for justice and protection for our communities. There's a lot of like litigation that's very unfair, but it's like founded on like Indigenous erasure and racism. So what do you expect? This is, so like there's jurisdictional like struggles with the differences between federal, state, county, tribal, and private like lands, and who has jurisdiction over those pieces of land. There's lack of emergency services, Amber Alert, counseling, family services. There's not very good relationship between governing entities. There's not very good communication between the FBI and the tribe. There's not very good communication between the state and the tribe. And we do need to continue to educate our relatives continuously. Because as we heard in the film, and as we all know, settler colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism are at the crux of a lot of these issues. Yeah, so I do want to go through some of these slides that I have on hand. Just like to go over some statistics with y'all, but if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and pose those questions. Or you can, if you're feeling shy, you can also put the question in the chat as well.
I have a question before you show the stats. Are the problems of missing women and murdered women mostly in the Midwest and the West, as opposed to the East and Northeast? Do your stats show that?
I feel like there's an overall lack of data like representation, but I feel like it's something that's present all over Turtle Islands and even like South America as well. But if anybody would like to chime in on that, I'm not like, you know, I don't have all of these statistics like memorized from like the top of my head.
There's actually a missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls data report that was done in 2019 in Canada, outside of Abigail Echohawk's report that she just did about a year ago as well. And these are all data that's been collected by natives and for natives, and is like a new practice for us and something that we need to do more. But you'll find a lot of that information there. I live on the border of US and Canada, like right in the middle between the US customs and the Canadian customs. And I don't know, when I'm on the Canadian side, and I'm like jogging or biking, like I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe. And if you look at our data, you'll know why, because it's extremely high, extremely prevalent, and it's just like careless to even in 2020 to even be, you know, out here like this and, you know, them continuously taking our women. And that is largely in part due to the man camps, but also the social conditioning that non-natives have, settler colonial violence conditioning that, especially surrounding reservations in regard to us, I find are more racist than those that are further away, based on my personal experience. But I think that Jean-Luc and Rick had something to mention or to add.
Jean-Luc, would you like to speak?
Tikash Sahini Hotu. My name is Jean-Luc Farit from the Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana, currently in Boston on traditional Massachusetts Nation territory. And I wanted to, is it possible for me to share screen really quickly? Because I have two things to show actually.
Let me just double check real quick. You should be able to.
I have the button, but I just want to make sure. Okay. All right. So this is a resource guide that we compiled at North American Indian Center of Boston called Violence Against Native American Women in Massachusetts, a guide to seeking assistance. And so this was done through funding through the Violence Against Women Act. And this was at a time when it was still in effect. I believe Congress has since let it lapse. So that funding is no longer there. But then there's also a couple of wrinkles to that as well. So with the Violence Against Women Act, there was the expansion of tribal jurisdiction powers, and I know there are a couple of other people that can probably speak to that. You know, tribes did have to opt in to being able to prosecute non-Native people on tribal lands who were causing this violence. But one of the big takeaways, the earlier question about data. When we were doing this resource guide, a lot of the information that we were relying on were sort of like national and international numbers. This is because we found that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, state agencies that are doing reporting aren't necessarily asking our women or our relatives whether or not they are American Indian or Indigenous. So that racial and ethnic data is not making it into the and it's not accurately being reported. And that's an issue that we are finding that even today in the current pandemic, that's still being carried on. So there was one comment in the chat about the census, and of course there's a lot of problems about the census, particularly that we are having to tell our community members that they have to identify as American Indian only, and we have people with many different backgrounds. But what we're finding is that, of course, with the guidance with this current census, that if they identify as American Indian and something else, then they get kicked into a multicultural category, so outside of American Indian numbers. And also what we're finding on the state level is that even without this federal census and new rules, that's sort of what's been going on, is that American Indian only is what is actually getting recorded by the state. And when somebody says American Indian plus African American or American Indian anything else, then they get otherized. They get placed into something that is not. And so we're finding that, we're not showing up in these numbers about the current pandemic, but then we're also not being underreported, if being reported at all, when it comes to violence against our Indigenous relatives here in the Commonwealth. And I wanted to also very quickly, here is, let's see, make sure that I have the, do you see this document, Justice for Nanette, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So this is currently an initiative that North American Indian Center of Boston is helping with one of our community families out of South Boston. This is Nanette Olson. She was born on April 12th, 1989 in South Boston, and before she turned 28, she was actually she died of unknown causes. However, as this flyer says, there are many questions that are surrounding her actual cause of death, and so NACOB is joining with the families for justice, led by her mother, Jenny Olson. And you can see that, she's survived by, a lot of, a large family, and she was also an active member of the Mi'kmaq Waghmaquk Native American community out of Nova Scotia. So we are, part of my wearing red today is wearing this band, Justice for Nanette, showing the date of her death, April 5th. 2018. So 2 years and a month today, NACOB has been joining with the family to call for justice. And so if anybody would like to join in with that campaign, please do message us so that we can see the justice for our community member. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. I feel like as Indigenous people, we have to be like, experts on like everything. And I'm so like appreciative for that. Like when we're having, these discussions, because, there's always like this abundance of like knowledge that, we just have like within our own community. I think that, yeah, there's a lot of like, a lot of interesting, things that you've mentioned, Jean-Luc, like just kind of addressing like data sovereignty almost. And I think that's something that I wanted to mention like later, is that's like one of the ways that Indigenous people are, owning their own data. And I know there's at least like 5 different like institutes, think tanks, like Indigenous like led institutes, think tanks, and women coalitions that are actively like, they have like drop in like information that you can add, so that you can add to like their database. And I think all of that is going to be like sourced into like places like the Urban Indian Health Institute later. And I think that is like one of the coolest things that I think that we're doing to like, take action as our own community. We just need to like continue to communicate that to like the rest of our relatives, and whatever, wherever they're at, because I know like for the Urban Indian Health Institute, they initially gathered that data by also looking on like Facebook and Instagram and pulling all of the missing like flyers and like following up with the families from that. But now like, that was a while ago, and now it's, we're continuously moving forward with our initiatives as an Indigenous community. And one of those things that we're doing is like having these like databases that we're developing on our own to track our own relatives and community members. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I can kind of open this up into a wider thing, a wider discussion, but like this discussion of justice, I think is very important. And I'm curious what justice would look like to y'all, or at least if there are like some resources already out there that address that. If anybody would like to talk a little bit about that. I know it's kind of like a big topic. And if we want to sit and think on that, I can kind of pull up some of the data that I had.
I have questions. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm sorry. Guatuana digdi Aquenitompak Lisbeth Natasuis Gonzalez Nachashayawonk, Taino Nuchapayawonk, the Bronx Natap. Greetings from the Bronx, where the good people live. I'm part of a forum that was created by the New York State Unified Court System. It serves as a liaison between the state and federal courts and the tribal courts and the nation representatives within the boundaries of New York State. And VAWA is one of the issues that we certainly have discussed and support. But one of our functions is to create relationships using our access and our being part of the court system so that the Native community is able to be visible, because the issue of invisibility is so huge in New York. And one of the things that occurs to me is training and seminars, and the usual thing that people do in order to be informed. There's a National Association of Attorneys General and of State Attorneys General, and there are state attorneys general that I would think would be open to the idea of having, for example, a presentation at their training sessions about this issue and why it's a problem, and is it being addressed? Has it been addressed? So I was asking before about the Northeast, because of course that's where we're situated in New York. And the state attorney general is not necessarily progressive on all Native issues, but could be approached. There was, Rick, when Tanya was alive, we had a meeting convened by the American Indian Law Alliance, where the community house was present, and different representatives were there from the state attorney general's office and so on, to discuss issues that matter, problem issues where there's no given solutions. And that's, I was asking about data to ask if this is an issue present here in New York. For example, I recall vaguely something about problems at the border, for example, where Akwesasne is. So is that an issue? And to what extent? But I just encourage our thinking outside the box, because there's ways to gain access that don't necessarily come to mind in the first instance. And one way to do that, for example, would be armed with stats, going to and I hear what you're saying about there not being stats and why there's a reason for that. And it's scary to hear the reasons. But for example, could the Attorney General be approached and say, and asked and told, we have this problem. This is how it manifests in New York. This is how it manifests in the tri-state area. This is how it manifests in the Northeast. And then this is how it manifests with our relatives who are to the west of us. Can you give us guidance on what we can do to raise this issue amongst the state attorneys general who you believe would be receptive to listening to this? Because we are having a problem with law enforcement. And the problem has to do with underfunding, jurisdiction, the limited jurisdiction that tribal police have, for example. But we need this guidance. And then I would say that there could also be a presentation made to the forum where I'm a member. I co-chair the Indian Child Welfare Act, the ICWA committee. I co-chair that committee, but I've been a member of the forum for a long time. Harry's a member. There's representation from Cayuga, Shinnecock, Unkechaug, Onondaga, Tuscarora, Seneca, and Oneida. And I left, I left somebody out who's not been participating, but Onondaga too. And the St. Regis Mohawk. So it could be brought up to the forum as an issue. It could be brought up to the Attorney General directly with representation from the forum, for example. But this is not on people's radar. It's just not. And now with the virus, everything is being pushed aside for obvious reasons. And Fran, I don't even want to. The loss of Kevin is like beyond description. And Ty, thank you for putting that stuff up. I think there's going to be other people collecting money.
Thank you.
The family. Yeah, but anyways, thought has to be given as to how to package a presentation that can be made and added to an agenda and with some possible thoughts as to what could happen. I know that training is something, for example, that we do with respect to ICWA. We have huge problems with ICWA compliance. So we do training. We train judges. We train court staff. We train Children's Protective Services. We do all of that. But is there a possibility for training state attorneys general and perhaps connecting with their civil rights bureaus in each one and saying this is a problem? And maybe that's something that we can do because we have access in New York like other people don't have.
Yeah. I think like you bring up like a lot of good points, and like I think this is one of those issues that we need to like, have like spaces like this where we're continuously discussing issues like this among ourselves and sharing resources and stuff, because I feel like there are a lot of resources out there, but it's kind of hard to find all of them. And I think that's what's so like important about having like days like this where we actively and intentionally, sit with this information and like re-educate ourselves and update ourselves on resources that we might have missed out on. But I do think like it's important to be like attacking these issues in whatever capacity we can, because I feel like it's something that needs to be, I appreciate like people that are, within your field, continuing to organize and do work there. And I also appreciate the people that are like creating these like sovereign like databases too, because I feel like both of those working together is where the direction that we want to head. I don't know. I know, Rick, you were also at the meeting that Lisbeth was at. I don't know if you wanted to chime in and add a little bit more about what.
Yeah, just really quick. Yeah, Liz, that, and as you remember also, there was interest in follow-up meetings. They were expressed by the Attorney General, but as you know, the timing wasn't quite right because of Tanya and everything that was happening. And so I think the biggest thing is when we get into those spaces where we can start to influence the way people understand our community and our issues, it has to be relentless. It's just, we have to continue. The one meetings don't do it. And one and done, just they don't do it. We have to keep meeting. We have to continue to educate them. We have to continue to bring other members of our community that have expertise in various areas. You need to do the kind of things you're talking about, Liz, to have trainings. We need to expand from the meetings to something more comprehensive in terms of how they understand who we are and what our rights are as sovereign people. And I think that's, unfortunately, I think it would have been, I think, a really good start, but we just, things just happened where we didn't pursue it the way we know we need to, but I believe those are channels that we need really to exploit and explore and push,
Yeah. I know that, I mean, in all fairness, I think people meant to follow up, but just so you know, for those who aren't aware, so we went to that meeting, and then Tanya Ganello-Fritchner passed away that night, and it was a disaster. We all went to the house to say goodbye to her. It was a disaster. But
sorry, Liz, I couldn't bring myself to saying what it was.
Yeah, that's what happened.
It's hard with everything right now.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of something different, which is, for example, that movie. When the judges meet for training during the summer, and who knows when that will ever happen again. But at night, there is a film that's shown, and there is a discussion after dinner. And which is the Moonlight one that got, Moonlight, for example, the one that got the Academy Award. Moonlight was shown, and we had a huge discussion. So this movie is quite good, and that could perhaps be the package, or the framework for. We'd like to present this at a meeting and have a speaker to talk about what's going on in the community right now. It's a thought.
Definitely. And I think we're going to be continuing these series, and we are going to be revisiting a lot of topics. We discussed earlier that we're going to be revisiting, what's going on in Mashpee and updating ourselves after May 7. And this certainly can be something that we can continue to work on. I know people in the chat were, suggesting we start a resources list. And I think that would be great, because I feel like a lot of people don't know that they can report, missing and murdered relatives to these Indigenous think tanks. And I think that's, a way that we can start sharing those resources and continuing to take ownership and reclaim this data and work from there. Let's see, I'm trying to see if I missed anything in the chat. There's a lot of really good resources in the chat. If you guys want to take a moment to look at that. Oh, John Luke.
Yeah, I wanted to just sort of I really empathize with the comments about like staying on top of state governments, state agencies, even municipal governments, because you know, we have to go like every level of government, and like government to government relationships with Indigenous nations don't just begin and end with the federal government. There are state level agreements, there are municipal agreements, you know, there's all kinds of different ways in which we can enforce. And you know, I really want to emphasize like the you know, the work that, you know, of course, that we're doing at NACOP, but then also American Indian Community House, all urban Indian centers, because 78% of our population live off tribal lands in urban areas. And so while we do not necessarily have access to the resources of a tribal government, we're often called to do tribal government level work in terms of providing social services and cultural services. Also, you know, you can look up the report, again, to tie it back to the current pandemic. There's the report by National Urban Indian Family Coalition that talks about the impacts of the current pandemic on urban Indian centers. So there's a lot of like overlap. So that the resources that are out there, the things that we need in order to do these studies, in order to do this sort of like research, right now tribal governments are critically underfunded in terms of pandemic response, and it makes it even more hard for our urban Indian organizations to do the work that we need to do to combat this pandemic, and also the pandemic of violence against our relatives, which, you know, with stay-at-home orders, with social distancing, we find that these are aggravating factors in terms of like violence against our people. So we're very concerned, especially during this time. And just finally, like, also, you know, looking out for everybody regardless of recognition status, you know, state recognized, federally recognized, we have to kind of, you know, if people are asserting themselves as tribes, you know, we have to be able to include them in the numbers. I saw the comment from our relatives from the Taino. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, when we talk about Indigenous peoples issues, that we're talking about those issues regardless of recognition by this government.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to chime in? Anything else? I'm gonna go ahead and kind of point in the direction of some of these resources that we're talking about for the people on Facebook. Some people mentioned the Urban Indian Health Institute. The Urban Indian Health Institute is kind of leading the way in research and data for urban American Indian and Alaskan Native communities. As a public health authority and one of 12 epidemiology centers in the country, and the only one that serves urban Indian health programs nationwide, UIHI conducts research and evaluation, collects and analyzes data, and provides disease surveillance to strengthen the health of American Indian and Alaskan Native communities. So a lot of the meme, well, I guess they're like infographics that you've seen on Instagram and Facebook today, a lot of that information is can be traced back to the Urban Indian Health Institute, which is over in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, I believe. So it's pretty easy to navigate, and there are a lot of like resources compiled on the Urban Indian Health Institute, and they have like data reports on missing, murdered Indigenous relatives for different like time periods, and kind of goes over like pointing people in the direction of like why this is happening, who they can reach out to and so forth. So that's a good resource. Another one is Sovereign Bodies. Sovereign Bodies Institute builds on Indigenous traditions of data gathering and knowledge transfer to create, disseminate, and put into action research on gender and sexual violence against Indigenous peoples. They're committed to conducting, supporting, and mobilizing culturally informed and community engaged research on gender and sexual violence against Indigenous people, uplifting Indigenous researchers, knowledge keepers, and data visualists in their work to research and disseminate data on gender and sexual violence against Indigenous people, empowering Indigenous communities and nations to continue work to end gender and sexual violence against Indigenous people through data-driven partnerships that enhance research efforts, develop best practices, and transform data to action to protect and heal their people. So that's just like another resource. And I know Sovereign Bodies is one of those ones where if you do have a missing relative, you can document that within their site, and they will do the job of putting it into a database and making it available to the people that are doing, you know, the good work. And the last one I wanted to mention is the Ontario Native Women's Association. The Ontario Native Women's Association is an organization that empowers and supports all Indigenous women, their families in the province of Ontario through research, advocacy, policy development, and programs that focus on local, regional, and provincial activities. Our vision is to be a unified voice for equity, equality, and justice for Indigenous women through cultural restoration within and across nations. And they also just do like a good job of you know, compiling all of these resources together. And I thought all these three were pretty helpful in like, I think like regionally too, because like I could see, you know, the Southwestern one, the Pacific Northwestern one, and then kind of like the Midwest. And if, I guess like the American Indian Community House can be for the Northeastern. But yeah, so I think if we can share those. Oh yeah, Tanis is sharing those in the chat for y'all. Thank you, Tanis. Some other places I would point y'all is the Red Nation and the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. I know the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women also has a place where you can submit forms for missing relatives as well. So that's just something, you know, to keep in mind. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I did mention earlier that census is a part of like H programming. So I wanted to draw attention to the way like data reflects Indigenous issues, like missing murdered Indigenous women. And we kind of touched on that, but I just wanted to take some time to kind of see the similarities between these two like sources of data collection, I guess. At the moment, all of the data we have is undercounted in the same way that the census undercounts our communities. There are a lot of amalgamating issues that contribute to this, such as census underreporting, state misclassification of Native peoples, like John Luke mentioned. But I just wanted everybody to kind of, you know, sit with that a little bit and kind of think about your contributions to data collection and how important that is. it's especially important if people are going to continue to do work with, you know, the state and upwards. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And we'll be sharing some links about the census as well if you haven't done it or if you want to do it. And those will also be in the chat.
I wanted to mention something.
Yeah, go ahead.
In thinking about the census in regards to American Indians, I'm like in the executive director at AICH. Say go everybody. This year we got a grant from the census to organize within our community, and you know, I appreciate that. We all appreciate that. In organizing our own data and collecting that data just to alleviate the distrust stigma that we've always felt towards the census. But the hard part is now we're dealing with COVID, and it wasn't easy to begin with, being that what we proposed and what we received was less than half, but still doing the same work plan. But then having to adapt to COVID-19 attacking our city and basically everywhere in the world at this point. What scares me is the lack of data that was already not collected on behalf of American Indians. But to add on to that, now we have to deal with COVID and all those American Indians that are in New York City that might not be able to afford Wi-Fi or internet services to do it online. All the mobile places and all the different spaces that would have been available to physically go in to do your census, or, you know, like they're just not going to be available anymore. So that scares me as far as us going missing, not a little bit beyond MMIW, but just missing and a continued erasure within those data sets. I attended a conference in Washington, D.C. in February for the National Congress of American Indian, and we were talking about government allocations within the federal budget. And we're about 2.4% of the federal, or of the overall population, but that's based on the census. But then how many of us are not counted there? And then to find out, we're going through the pie chart of who gets what, and we're like 2.4%, we're promised 1%. We should get what's reflected in our population, but then we're promised 1%, but we only get 0.5%. And that's been like over the course of like years, maybe a decade. And this is okay. You know, that's not okay with me, you know, but in Washington, that's just, you know, what's happening. And then we're feeling it right now, going through COVID, not just in New York City, but all over Indian country, because there was maybe like $8 billion allocated towards Indian country, and they haven't given it to us. I just got an alert in my email earlier saying maybe something happened, but it's been over a month that they haven't given it to us because they don't have the tools developed to distribute it to us. So to me, that's neglect, that's systemic neglect, you know, and all these things combined, you know, on top of like just all the eugenics, the systemic eugenics that we experience through MMIW, and all of these different systems and tools against us. I think we have to, as a means of fighting for ourselves and fending for ourselves, have to make sure that ourselves, our brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, neighbors, you know, people you know, make sure, you know, you get counted, make sure you just work towards supporting each other in all different levels of existence, from politics straight down to, we can't give each other a hug right now, but, check in with people to see if they're okay. Start caring for each other, because based on my experience, as a Ungwehue, it's hard to be positive and strong in such oppressive, constant, heavy, suppressive environments. It's like never ending for us. It's like almost every day we're fighting. So sometimes we're conditioned to be in a fighting mode, but it sometimes that energy reflects onto each other. And we need to make sure, we maintain a good mind and be kind to each other, because we're all going through similar things, especially in Indian country. There's a lot of struggles occurring right now, and specifically with COVID. I want to make sure, as it being in leadership, that we do get counted, we do look out for each other. And it's a really hard time for me right now. A lot of things are happening. But I just wanted to make sure that, the level of erasure, how deep that is, just even looking at the federal budget, and that is a treaty right, and I think I'm done.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very, very important, because like we said, a lot of this has to do with like infrastructure too. And census does, provide some funds for that, which, anything is helpful, for tribal communities. So I think we should continue to be mindful of, sources of data collection in general as Indigenous people, because we are, because we're facing settler colonialism, we're facing, erasure, because that is what settler colonialism strives for, is our erasure. But they can't erase us if we're, taking ownership of our own data, and we're, continuously working towards that. So now I kind of wanted to transition into some action-based things that we can do together. I have several suggestions. One of them we can do all here together. If you have your paper, actually, no. First, let's do the candlelight thing. So I wanted to make a portion of this time to be mindful and really sit with the people that have gone missing and murdered. And if you want to offer some words for anybody that that has gone missing and murdered, or if you would like to just sit in silence for a little while and just think about the relatives that have you got gone. I think that is something that was important that the video pointed out, is just remembering these relatives and being very mindful about that. So if you have your candle on hand, go ahead and pull that out, and we'll give it 5 minutes or three minutes. Just sit and just think, open your mind, and Thank you, everybody. I hope that was grounding for everybody. I know it was grounding for me, to just set some time aside today to be very intentional with like how I'm thinking about, these relatives that have, gone missing and murdered. But if anybody wanted to offer some words, or if you have any questions, that are lingering, feel free to reach out through the chat, or if you wanted to unmute yourself, that's also fine. There was another thing that I meant to note, but we can also move along to the pen and marker solidarity, because we want to ground ourselves, which we did, but we also want to educate our community and, show that we care. And I think one of those ways for me, I thought would be like writing, No More Stolen Sisters, MMI WGT2S, just bringing visibility to this this crisis. So if you wanted to bring out your paper and your pen and write a little note, we'll give you like three minutes again to write something, and we'll hold this up and take a screenshot of some sort. And yeah, I'll also play some music so it's not super quiet.
I'm sorry, what are we writing?
Just a statement of solidarity, or just to shed some light on this day of like remembrance for missing, murdered Indigenous, like it can be anything. It can be the hashtag MMIWG2S. It can be MMIW. It can be somebody's name. It can be whatever you want. Whatever you want it to be.
See mine?
Yeah.
I've been drawing it all this time.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I was just writing things that they were in the videos.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. And that's nice.
I got carried away.
I love it. I like the wigwam on the side, Yaguihane.
I remember when I was, maybe I was like under 10 years old, and we used to ride our bikes by school here in Akwesasne. I live on the island, and there was this weird cul-de-sac where you could just go turn around and shoot back out, but it was near the school. Within like maybe like a year, I think, 2 young teenage women were found separately, but they were found in like area live just not far from my house. Like, and all the police being there, and seeing them, each of them out there at different times, of course. But yeah, I just, as a child, you don't think of it being all this, understand how huge this is for us.
For real,
Yeah.
and I feel like it only
I
gets
had another
bigger.
reminder. Yeah. It doesn't seem to be lessening or decreasing.
I would like to mention our ex-board member, Grace Bulltail's niece daughter, Kay Sarah, who went missing and was found, not alive, but, and of course, they're very upset because there's no definite ruling on what it was, whether it was, a murder or whether, but they're pretty sure that's what it was. But they're not getting justice, so they're constantly asking for justice for Kay Sarah.
Thank you for sharing, Fran. If everybody is ready to hold up your signs, or if you need a few more minutes, and yeah, perfect. If you're done, could you please raise up your sign? Oh wait, I think mine's back.
Maybe it'd be a good time to put it on gallery view, Tanis.
Wouldn't you know, I already did that.
Oh my God, great.
Good thing I'm
Very
on.
much like.
How do you not make it backwards?
I do not know.
It's not backwards for us. Only you can see it backwards, right?
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna take a screenshot in 3, 2, 1. I think that worked. Wait, 1 second. 3, 2, 1. And I'm gonna do another one for the second slide of attendees. In 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Wow, look at Andy's picture. That's cool.
Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. It's always so important that we, as Native people come together, especially, to talk about, these issues with each other. So thank you so much for attending. I also wanted to, we talked briefly at the beginning of this meeting, but we will be having more social justice series. Next week, we're going to be touching on the Mashpee territory, and I do want to give Lizbeth and Jean-Luc the floor at this time to kind of preface what we'll be discussing next week, and just stuff to look out for. So yeah, go ahead.
We've been joined by Chief Harry Wallace, who can address the legal issues. I have certain restrictions, but he can speak more openly than I can. Harry, open up your mic and your...
I unmuted him. He should be unmuted. Yep, there he is.
Yeah, open up your camera. There we go.
Hello, everyone. I got here a little bit late before you had the your banners. Friday, I'm assuming everybody is up to date on that. There's a hearing that was scheduled for Thursday concerning the oral arguments on whether the memorandum of the Interior Department was arbitrary, capricious, and contrary to law interpretation. Everyone familiar with that? Yes, no?
Not really.
Not really, okay. So the Mashpee case is, an action was brought by the Mashpee in the District Court for the District of Columbia, DC Circuit. and it was to challenge the decision of the Interior Department to, as a administrative decision of the Interior, to remove their land from trust status without on the basis of a memo put out by the Trump administration that the interpretation of under jurisdiction and of the Mashpee people did not apply to them because they were not under federal jurisdiction in 1934. That's the argument that was made. And the memo put out by the Interior Department changed the interpretation of what constituted under jurisdiction that was done in 2013, I believe. So they argued that the Trump administration's memorandum was arbitrary, capricious, and a violation of reasonable interpretation of the law, contrary to reasonable interpretation of the law. And as a result, they filed an injunction. They filed an action seeking a preliminary injunction prohibiting the Interior Department from taking their land out of trust status. And it was scheduled for oral argument. It is scheduled for oral argument on Thursday. So everybody following me so far? If you're getting lost, let me know, because I don't want anybody to be
got it.
here as to what's happening, okay? All right, okay. Friday, the judge, I believe his name is Judge Paul Friedman from the DC Circuit, issued a 5-page order, and you all can look it up because it's at Turtle Talk. Everybody familiar with Turtle Talk? Go to a site called Turtle Talk. It's University of Michigan Law School, and it keeps you up to date on it keeps you up to date on mostly all of the cases affecting Indian country, whether federal or state cases. So if you go to Turtle Talk, you can be able to punch up the most recent opinion by Judge Friedman. And Friday, Judge Friedman issued a 5-page order essentially identifying the fact that the order under which Mashpee was appealing, or at least commenced their action to overturn, was in fact, on March 9th, repudiated by the Solicitor General of the Interior Department. In other words, they had already revoked that order 2 months ago. And yet, the decisions made in court were based on an order not only been repudiated, but that the court was not aware of the repudiation by the federal government. So the government argued for enforcement of an order, of a memo, that it in fact had already known that it had already been repudiated. So in essence, somebody lied to the court. So the judge was noticeably upset in his opinion that he had found out that day. He found out, he said, the order says less than a week, which means that the motion was due, returnable on oral argument on Thursday. So he found out that day, Friday, and issued an order stating that that they're going to have to answer 4 questions. And one of those 4 questions is what effect does this repudiation of this order have on the decisions made in this case in the past? And so they may not hear the case on Thursday because he ordered both parties to brief, meaning to fully explain the impact on this repudiation into the court. So they're going to need time to do that. Usually they get 60 days each side, maybe 30 days each side. And so it may take some time for the decision to actually be, for the arguments to actually be made. I don't know. I kind of think that they're based on that they may delay the oral arguments, but there is a strong argument by Mashpee that if there is a delay, that the judge should issue a temporary restraining order restraining the VIA or the Interior Department from taking any action or staying any action to remove the land from trust status pending the the new briefing schedule, because if they don't do that, then it would have a serious negative impact on the territory of the Mashpee. So I have a feeling that, you know, good counsel will certainly make the argument that they will not object to a delay so long as the Mashpee people are not adversely affected by that. So everybody following me so far?
Yes.
Okay. So they, you have to read the order. It's a short order, 5-page order. I think you'll be very clear in that the government argued in favor of a memo that was no longer in effect. Okay? So they took a position that they themselves knew was false in this Mashpee case. And that, I can tell you, you know, if I had practiced law before, I practiced in law before, if I had done that, they would have thrown me under the courthouse if I had done any kind of behavior like that. So I don't know what this judge is going to do, but he is noticeably pissed about being treated this way. And he hasn't told anyone how he found out, because he said Mashpee didn't know. I don't know if the defendants, who are the defendants in the Littlefields, I don't know if they didn't know. But certainly the government knew. And the government still maintained an argument that they knew was based on a memorandum that they knew was already invalid to begin with. You know, there's a lot of, somebody has to answer for that. The problem is that we don't care who that person is who answers for it, but that the Mashpee are not adversely affected by this, by this misdirection and certainly false positioning by the government, and Mashpee should not suffer because of this misbehavior on the part of government. But that is yet to be seen. So that's the latest development that you're dealing with here on the case. I think that they will have to, I'm sure that they'll have to make an argument that they should not be adversely affected pending any rebriefing, because he did order further briefs on this issue. And you look at the case, there's 4 things that the judge has ordered that they undertake. I have it about that. Oh, I'm really good. Boy, I'm really slick. Look at this. Relevance of the March 5th memorandum on determining eligibility under the first definition of Indian under Section 19. Second thing is that March 9th memorandum from the solicitor, withdrawal of the solicitor's opinion and the meaning under federal jurisdiction. And the March 10th memorandum solicitor entitled Procedure for Determining Eligibility for Land into Trust. So all of these things that they've argued that Mashpee was not successful on in the First Circuit case is being now called into question. All of those things. Why this court should afford any deference to the agency's reliance on that opinion, and the relevance of the district court's decision where it found that the M opinion to be reasonable. They argued that it was being reasonable at a time when it was no longer in effect. That's the real unconscionable behavior of the government in this case. And the judge says in first sentence, it has just come to the court's attention that the solicitor, U.S. Department of Interior, concluded that the interpretation of the M opinion is not consistent with the ordinary meaning and statutory, legislative, and contemporary administrative understanding of the phrase, recognize Indian tribe under federal jurisdiction. That's the first sentence of the order. I laugh because it is so egregious in behavior, and we're kind of used to it. I'm in the middle of a fishing rights case myself against the state of New York, and we argue treaty rights protection. And the first thing they say is, well, you don't have any treaties with the United States, and you're not Indians under federal jurisdiction, and you don't have any treaty rights. And if you do have a treaty rights and if you do have an Indians, those rights were superseded by the Constitution. And if it wasn't superseded by the Constitution, then the court shouldn't enforce it because it's a endangered species. And if it's not an endangered species, well, then it's in violation of state law. So at every point in time, we knock down their arguments, they come up with another one. They give you another one that you have to consider. So it's a constant defeat. So it's a constant battle of challenging every argument that they come up with. And then finally they run out of arguments and they say, well, we're the government, so you should listen to us. That's their fallback position. We're the government, we know better. So anybody who's been involved in that kind of process understands the egregious behavior is they get away with it all the time. So until somebody points it out to them. So hopefully the court, you have a chance to argue before somebody who is supposedly fair and impartial. Hopefully you have that in Judge Friedman, and he'll be able to look at that and understand how unconscionable the behavior of the government's been in this situation. That's the latest news.
How would you, what would you recommend be the best way we could support this and all those working on it specifically from a legal perspective? Like, how could we support as a community?
Well, my normal, being an old school, organizer, we would just like march on that court, but we can't do that now, right? So, because we would have a rally there, we'd have a drum there, we'd have a whole lot of action going on in front of that courthouse. But given the conditions that we're under right now, how do you virtual rally? You have to be, you're better at that than I am. So you have to tell me, how do you make that a virtual rally, pointing out, focusing on the egregious behavior of misrepresentations and the decisions based upon misrepresentations made in this case and in this matter, and broadcasting that. I don't know how that's done, Twitter, or I don't even have a Twitter account. That's how bad I am. But whatever it is, and have a virtual rally. If we can't get it, physically, make it virtually, and say, we have to come, we have to be there in some sort of presence to let everybody know that this is what we're dealing with here. You're probably better at that than I am.
Is there a way that there's no way this can be held back until we get through COVID? Like, there's no way to put this on pause for a little while?
Well,
this is their
weapon, right? The judge is asking them to brief this matter, which tells you that if the judge is asking them to brief it, it's not going to be a 10-day thing. If they're briefing it, normally in the federal courts, I want to say 60 days, Liz. She's going to look it up. See, I love that. That's why I love it.
This is like, this makes me feel like this is like biological warfare being used against our people, specifically in this case, the Mashpee. Like they're literally using COVID as a weapon to de-establish.
So Melissa,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So really quickly, so with North American Indian Center Boston, of course, we're joining with United American Indians New England. We're trying to follow all of the cues from tribal government, from tribal members. Talk about the virtual rally. Right now, there is the keeping the sacred fire. So we lit candles tonight. Of course, we can keep these burning. But then also we can also have the two prayers that are going up. The original request from the tribe was that fires would be lit and held from May 3rd through the reaching of a decision. Of course, we had the original oral argument time of May 7th. So it seems like we're going to have that extension based upon the processing of the briefings. But I do want to just pick up on the point that the timing is also very critical. There is currently an agreed to restraining order, which I believe it goes through May 15th. So if there's 10 days or so in order to do the briefs, it's possible that the time could run out on that original restraining order as well.
So what they need would probably, and I'm sure they're intelligent. I know they're intelligent attorneys. I'm sure that they understand consequences of making sure that the restraining order does not expire pending the briefing of this change in circumstances. And I would warrant that the judge would give at least 30 days for each side to brief this issue, perhaps even more. But given that it is a significant change in circumstances, he may want a full time to brief this issue. It could be 45 to 60 days. It all depends on what the judge decides. But I am absolutely certain, given his anger, expressed anger at these circumstances, that he would extend the restraining order, as you say. There is one in effect. That he would extend that, but that argument has to be made, and it might still go forward on the 7th of May because those arguments have to be made unless they agree to in writing and something pops up in the record that says that an agreement to extend the restraining order pending a briefing of this issue, and an order is a further briefing schedule is set by the judge. So I would be looking in the court record for anything that's happening tomorrow, or today. It might have happened tonight. I don't know, but tonight or tomorrow, with respect to whether they have made an agreement to extend the oral arguments or to adjourn the oral arguments until the end of the briefing.
Yeah. So there's also two fronts to this. There's the lawsuit. There's what's going on in the courts, but there's also the political legislative process as well, to the Reservation Reaffirmation Act that has passed the House last summer and is currently sitting in Mitch McConnell's Senate. And while we can say it's one party or the other, actually it does not enjoy unanimous support from the Democratic side of the Senate. And so it's very critical for us to also write senators and push for the Reservation Reaffirmation Act.
Right,
but
because the senator of Connecticut, as you know, what's his name? Senator
Murphy?
No, Connecticut Senator begins with a B.
Oh, I should know that. I live in Connecticut, for crying out loud.
Blumenthal? Is it Blumenthal?
Blumenthal.
Blumenthal, right.
Was the Attorney General that fought the Eastern Pequots and the Scotticook and all of them against their rights. And so I have no doubt that Blumenthal is one of those opposed to Mashpee's full recognition. I have no doubt of that in my mind, because he is one of them. And I don't know about Murphy. I don't think Murphy was involved in that process, but I know Blumenthal was.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's not necessarily unanimity amongst the Democratic Party here. And I don't go by Republican and Democrat. I go by those people who understand and recognize sovereignty. Now, you can be critical of Gorsuch, and you may be right in your criticism of him, but that's somebody who comes from a place that understands what sovereignty means, and his decisions have reflected that. Now, I'm not being critical of his behavior towards women one way or the other, because I believe knowing these little frat boys the way I do is probably all true. Okay, but Blumenthal's liberal, except when it comes to Indians. So.
Yeah. And then finally, the one last thing that I would add. Sorry for interrupting you, Chief. But yeah, also so there's the Reservation Reaffirmation Act, but then there's also the legislative fix to Carcieri versus Salazar, which is the Supreme Court decision that all of this is kind of stemming from, that interpretation of the Indian Reorganization Act. So this is why the egregious behavior by this government, as Chief is noting, is an existential crisis for the rights of all tribes, but specifically that class of tribes that could be construed to be under federal jurisdiction after 1934. My own tribe, Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana, being one of those tribes. So if we do not have this Carcieri fix, then all of these tribes would be subject to this reaffirmation process, going through acts of Congress. Our tribal lands are subject to partisan politics. We need both. We need the immediate fix of reaffirming the reservation, but we also need that big fix of Carcieri versus Salazar. So, again, write your senators. That's where the fight is right now. Write your senators.
Jean-Luc, do you have sometimes there's like toolkits for people to storm away through social media and email in politicians and so forth that would be effective to share?
Yeah.
Is there a toolkit of that sort?
We've been following the calls to action from tribal government. I've been kind of independently compiling those. I can get the URL and share in the comments after this. But yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
So this is a new way of organizing and organizing abilities. We need to demonstrate to government that there's a lot of people paying attention to this and objecting to it, and we need under the new the new way of doing things. This is a new era. And we need to you need to take advantage of these tools. The old tools work. We know they work. We need to make the old tools come alive in the 21st century. And we need to learn how to do that. So that means that we're starting all over again. And we do that all the time. We start all over again. But we need to make those tools work for us. We know those tools work. Donald Trump is very good at taking those old tools and converting them to new to new things that make it work for him. And he picks and chooses all those little things, and it works for him because he pushes those buttons, and he's good at it. Obama was good at it. We got to get good. We got to get real good at this.
Yeah, they're working
You
extra
guys,
hard.
you know, I can sit here and read this stuff and interpret this stuff all day long, but if I'm the only one doing it, and it doesn't get conveyed so that the people who can know how to take action take that action, then we're missing a critical point here, you know, critical unity here. And that's all I'm saying. You know, I'm not an expert by any means, but, you know, how do you stand on the front lines of a interactive picket? Yeah, that's
I think
pretty
we have to
good.
do
I think I gotta write that down, man. That's pretty cool.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for chiming in and giving us an update. I think next week for sure we will be having another of these social justice series that is going to be updating, you know, the wider community about what happens, you know. And we do have like some resources on hand, so I'll make sure to send those resources out with the emails that I send out to people, the participants, the attendees. With that said, Tanis, would you be able to give the events, the upcoming events? And then we will be closing out from there.
Sure. So today is Tuesday. So that means tomorrow is Wednesday. And that means we have Fit Native at noon, if anybody didn't know what day it was. Wednesday and Friday, we have Fit Native, our live workout class that I run. I modify for all different abilities. It's at noon. It runs around 35 to 45 minutes. That's all posted on our Facebook page. And tomorrow, Wednesday, also at 5 p.m., we have our weekly sacred spaces honoring our elders and our stories of living culture. And we always have a guest each week. And tomorrow's guest is Chief Reggie Caesar and his cousin Layla. You can join via Zoom. You can, I'll post it on, there's an event on Facebook right now. You can find the information there. We're gonna stream live to Facebook, hopefully if it works, if not YouTube. And then Saturday we have Sacred Spaces, but it's our private honoring our elders talking circle. We don't blast that one out on Facebook, but we just have a private Zoom if the community is interested. We, it's open to all ages, but we do check in with our elders online and see what they need and how everyone is doing, and just to check in with each other. We do that on Saturday and Sunday at noon. We also have a Wellbriety this week, I believe. Melissa, Jim, what dates are those? I don't have those.
No, next week. Sorry.
Oh, next week.
Wednesday.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And then on Sunday, Thursday. Thursday at 8 o'clock, we're having another live play reading, but this week we're doing 3 short plays. 2 of them are by Vicky Ramirez, she's Tuscarora, and the third one is by our own Ty Defoe, who is on the Zoom right now. So there'll be 3 short plays in a row, and Sunday at 3 o'clock is Sheldon Raymore's Facebook Live updates of what's happening the next week. And then Tatiana series again next week. Everything's pretty much recurring on a weekly rolling basis now. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for joining. It's so nice to share space with everybody on this call. I think it was very needed. And I'm glad we were able to get updates, you know, afterwards as well. But yeah, without further ado, I'd like to wish you a great evening, and hopefully you have some delicious dinner. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Hagone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.